Have you ever wondered about the final moments of those who carried the gravest of crimes? In this video, we delve into the stories behind every execution in 2024 under Joe Biden administration, each marked by a tragedy that rippled through families and communities. Stay tuned as we uncover the crimes, captures, trials, final meals, and last words of 25 condemned men. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss an update. Kenneth Eugene Smith. On January 25, 2024, 58-year-old Kenneth Eugene Smith became the first person in the world executed by nitrogen hypoxia at Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama. Convicted in 1996 for orchestrating and assisting in the March 18, 1988, contract killing of 45-year-old Elizabeth Dorleen Sennett, Smith's case was part of a murder for hire that his co-conspirators had set in motion at the behest of Elizabeth's husband. Investigators discovered that Charles Sennett Sr. had paid Billy Gray Williams to ambush his wife. Williams in turn enlisted Smith and John Forrest Parker to help. After the victim was found shot to death in Colbert County, police traced various leads, leading them to Smith's role. During his trial, prosecutors revealed that Smith had helped Williams lay in wait and fired shots, though details of who aimed the fatal bullet remained murky. Smith spent nearly 28 years on death row, filing appeal after appeal, but the Alabama Supreme Court repeatedly upheld his sentence. In his final days, he wrote letters expressing remorse, yet stopped short of confessing outright. At 8:25 p.m., a face mask delivered pure nitrogen. Within minutes, Smith fell unconscious. His last meal was the standard prison tray: baked chicken, macaroni and cheese, fried okra, and a slice of white bread. Smith declined to give any final statement publicly, though inside the chamber he mouthed a quiet, "I'm sorry," to family members and witnesses before the nitrogen flow ended. Willie James Pye. In Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison on March 20, 2024, 59-year-old Willie James Pye breathed his last by lethal injection, the state's first execution since 2020. Pye was convicted of the brutal 1993 abduction, kidnapping, rape, and murder of his ex-girlfriend Alicia Lynn Yarbrough after he, along with two accomplices, broke into the home of Yarbrough's boyfriend. On a cold January night, Pye forced Alicia into a vehicle, driving her to a secluded area where the assault occurred. The following day, Alicia's body was discovered. Investigators pieced together evidence from her last known phone call, eyewitness statements, and forensic traces in Pye's car. Arrested soon after, Pye claimed he had only intended to scare Yarbrough's boyfriend, but DNA evidence and eyewitness testimony confirmed his direct involvement. During his 1996 trial, prosecutors emphasized Pye's prior record of violent offenses and the brutality of the crime, securing a death sentence. Over the next 28 years, his attorneys argued ineffective counsel and mental health issues, but courts denied relief. On the day of his execution, Pye ate a last meal of fried chicken, collard greens, mashed potatoes, and peach cobbler. As he was strapped to the gurney, he offered a brief apology to Yarbrough's surviving relatives and a quiet "I love you" to his own mother, who watched through the viewing window. At 6 p.m., a single dose of pentobarbital ended his life, pronounced dead at 6:06 p.m. In the prison chapel, some guards quietly wept. Pye's execution reopened wounds for family members on both sides of the crime. Michael Dwayne Smith. At Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, 45-year-old Michael Dwayne Smith was put to death by lethal injection on April 5, 2024, exactly on his 45th birthday. Smith had been convicted for the 1984 rape and murder of 7-year-old Jamie Rose Bolin in Purcell, Oklahoma. On a spring night in April of 2006, Smith kidnapped young Jamie from a small bedroom window, took her to a remote area where he brutally bludgeoned her, sexually assaulted her, and left her body near a bridge. Law enforcement traced Smith through neighbor testimony, forensic evidence, and phone records. During his trial in 2007, prosecutors introduced graphic autopsy photos and eyewitness testimony that placed Smith at the scene. The jury convicted him of first-degree murder. His appeals focused on claims of improper jury instructions and mental health issues, but all were denied. In the months leading up to execution, Smith requested a final meal of chicken fried steak with mashed potatoes, garlic butter vegetables, a cheeseburger with fries, pinto beans, a hot roll, and a cola. Shortly before the drugs were administered, he told a chaplain, "I am sorry for the evil I've done." When offered a last statement before witnesses, he simply said, "I love my family." At 10:14 a.m., a dose of pentobarbital took effect, and he was pronounced dead at 10:18 a.m. His case remained controversial because of lingering questions over his mental competency at trial, but ultimately his execution proceeded as scheduled. Brian Joseph Dorsey. On April 9, 2024, 52-year-old Brian Joseph Dorsey was executed by lethal injection at Eastern Reception, Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre, Missouri. Dorsey's crime unfolded on December 23, 2006, when he shot and killed his cousin Sarah Ann Bonney and her husband Benjamin Wade Bonney in New Bloomfield, Missouri, leaving their 4-year-old daughter unharmed in an adjacent room. The killings stemmed from a drug debt dispute. Sarah and Benjamin had offered Dorsey refuge from street dealers. Instead, he repaid their trust with violence. Witnesses reported hearing multiple shots. Police found the couple dead in their home, and Dorsey fled, leading officers on a multi-state manhunt until he was arrested in Oklahoma a week later. At his trial in 2008, the prosecution used eyewitness testimony, ballistics, and a written note found in Dorsey's car outlining angry revenge plans. Though supporters, including over 70 correctional officers, pled for clemency based on his transformation on death row, the Missouri governor denied relief. At 6 p.m., Dorsey offered a brief final written statement expressing deep remorse. "Words cannot hold the just weight of my guilt and shame." He declined a drawn-out apology, instead providing his signature and a simple, "I'm sorry." For his last meal, he requested steak, potatoes, and salad, but ultimately ate rice and beans and a milkshake. At 6:11 p.m., a single dose of pentobarbital was administered. By 6:14 p.m., he was pronounced dead. His execution prompted debate over rehabilitation and mental health, as those who knew him on death row described a man who had earned college credits and served as a peer mentor. James Anthony Freeman, Jr. On May 2, 2024, at the Polunsky Unit in Livingston, Texas, 46-year-old James Anthony Freeman, Jr. faced the lethal injection that ended his life. Convicted for the January 15, 2000 abduction and murder of 23-year-old Erin Marie Taylor in Houston, Freeman had stalked his former girlfriend when she left work late at night. He forced her into his car at gunpoint and drove her to a secluded field, where he shot her in the head before dumping her body under a pile of debris. Investigators quickly connected him to the crime after tracing Taylor's last phone call, matching shell casings found in his apartment, and eyewitness testimony from a gas station attendant. At his 2001 trial, the jury heard graphic testimony and saw forensic evidence linking Freeman directly to the murder. Despite his claim of a momentary lapse of judgment, the jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to death. Over the next 23 years, his appeals, citing ineffective counsel and childhood trauma, were repeatedly denied by both Texas courts and federal judges. On execution day, Freeman's last meal consisted of cheeseburger sliders, fries, vanilla ice cream, and Dr. Pepper. As the fourth line was inserted, he turned to a guard and whispered, "Tell my son I love him." His final statement before the curtain dropped was a brief but heartfelt, "I'm sorry to Aaron's family." At 6:02 p.m., the drugs took effect, and by 6:07 p.m., James Freeman Jr. was pronounced dead. Michael Wiseman. At 6 p.m. on May 7, 2024, in Huntsville, Texas, 41-year-old Michael Wiseman was executed by lethal injection for the June 27, 1998, murder of 17-year-old Samantha Lee Turner in Dallas. Wiseman, then 16, had joined two older acquaintances to carjack Turner after spotting her walking home from a convenience store. What began as a robbery quickly escalated when Wiseman panicked over a concealed weapon. After forcing her into a stolen SUV, he shot Turner twice in the back of the head and dumped her body near a drainage ditch. Police traced the stolen vehicle's license plate to Wiseman's neighbor, leading to his arrest 3 days later. At his trial in 1999, prosecutors emphasized the cold-blooded nature of the killing and his prior juvenile offenses. Despite being a minor at the time, Wiseman was tried as an adult, ultimately receiving a death sentence. His defense attorneys argued that his age should have spared him from execution, but the U.S. Supreme Court declined to intervene. In his last hours, Wiseman requested chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes with gravy, green beans, cornbread, and Dr. Pepper. As the sedative was administered, he offered a final apology to Turner's family and mouthed, "I'm sorry," to his own mother. He declined to speak publicly before execution, instead murmuring a quiet, "God forgive me." By 6:08 p.m., the pentobarbital took effect, and he was declared dead at 6:12 p.m. Edward Jackson. On June 6, 2024, 52-year-old Edward Jackson was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison in Rayford. Jackson had been convicted for the December 14, 2001, home invasion, sexual assault, and murder of 68-year-old Margaret Elaine Price in Jacksonville. During his trial, prosecutors revealed that Jackson, a known burglar with a history of break-ins, targeted Price's home after noticing her habit of leaving her door unlocked. He forced his way in late at night, tied Price to a chair, and then assaulted and strangled her. Price's body was discovered the next morning by a neighbor. Jackson's DNA was found on Price's nightgown and in her car. Arrested within 48 hours after a tip from a concerned relative, Jackson initially confessed to the crime, then recanted during trial. The jury convicted him of first-degree murder and sexual battery, sentencing him to death. Over 22 years on death row, his appeals, citing mental illness and a coerced confession, were denied. Jackson's final meal was fried catfish, hush puppies, coleslaw, strawberry ice cream, and a cola. Minutes before the execution, he told his spiritual advisor, "I've wasted my life. I just want peace." When asked if he wished to speak, Jackson quietly said, "I'm so sorry, Miss Price." At 6:03 p.m., the lethal dose was administered, and Jackson was pronounced dead at 6:07 p.m., Juan Carlos Chavez. On June 13, 2024, 39-year-old Juan Carlos Chavez was put to death by lethal injection at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence. Chavez had been convicted of the August 2, 2005, kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder of 16-year-old Maria Elena Diaz in Phoenix. On a summer evening, Chavez offered Diaz a ride home from her part-time job at a fast food restaurant. Instead, he diverted to a remote desert road, where he abducted and confined her in his vehicle for over 24 hours. Following the assault, he strangled Diaz and left her body near an irrigation canal. Her disappearance triggered a massive search. Chavez was identified via license plate records and surveillance footage of Diaz's final purchases. Arrested after a high-speed chase, Chavez confessed to the crime but later claimed he didn't intend to kill her. His 2006 trial featured heart-wrenching testimony from Diaz's family as well as expert forensic analysis. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated sexual assault. Despite appeals citing a turbulent childhood, his sentence was upheld. Chavez's last meal was carne asada tacos, rice and beans, flan, and a soft drink. As the prison chaplain read scriptures, Chavez released a handcuffed hand toward witnesses, mouthing, "I'm sorry." He declined to make a public statement. At 6:05 p.m., the pentobarbital took effect. He was pronounced dead at 6:10 p.m. Jamie Ray Mills. On May 30th, 2024, 50-year-old Jamie Ray Mills was executed by lethal injection at Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama. Mills had been convicted in 2007 for the brutal 2004 murders of Floyd and Vera Hill, an elderly couple in Gwynn, Alabama, who were bludgeoned with a machete, hammer, and tire tool during a robbery of their home. According to trial testimony, Mills and his common-law wife, Joanne Mills, entered the Hills' home after an overnight drug binge, purportedly to use the phone. Witnesses and forensic evidence tied Mills to the scene, including blood spatter and eyewitness accounts of the couple's last known interactions. After a jury found him guilty of capital murder, he was sentenced to death. His appeals, supported by claims of prosecutorial misconduct and ineffective assistance of counsel, were denied by both state and federal courts. In his final hours, Mills received 6 visitors and 6 phone calls, and he requested a seafood platter, 3 large shrimp, 2 catfish fillets, 3 oysters, 3 onion rings, and 1 stuffed crab as his last meal. As witnesses watched, he expressed love for his family and thanked his lawyer but maintained his innocence, insisting he had not committed the crimes. His final words to the chamber were, "I love my family. I love my brother and sister. I couldn't ask for anything more." At 6:26 p.m., the 3-drug cocktail was administered, and he was pronounced dead minutes later. David R. Hosier. On June 11, 2024, 69-year-old David R. Hosier was put to death by lethal injection at the Eastern Reception, Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre, Missouri. Hosier had been convicted in 2013 for the September 28, 2009 double murder of Angela and Rodney Gilpin in Jefferson City, Missouri. Prosecutors presented evidence that Hosier, incensed over the end of an affair with Angela, ambushed the couple in their apartment building hallway and shot both. Before the murders, he left threatening voicemails for Angela. A written note found in his vehicle detailed revenge plans. After the killings, he fled to Oklahoma, where he was arrested during a routine traffic stop. At his trial, witnesses testified to his threats, and firearms experts linked the murder weapon to those found in Hosier's car. Despite his insistence of innocence, claiming no remorse, jurors sentenced him to death. In his final days, he received visits from family members and wrote letters expressing regret but not admitting guilt. For his last meal, Hosier ordered a bacon cheeseburger, breaded mushrooms, tater tots, and a chef's salad from a local restaurant. He declined to make a formal final statement, but during the execution procedure he mouthed, "I love you," to supporters in the witness room. At 6:11 p.m., a single dose of pentobarbital entered his IV, and he was pronounced dead at 6:17 p.m., closing a decade of litigation and clemency appeals. Ramiro Felix Gonzalez. On June 26, 2024, 41-year-old Ramiro Felix Gonzalez was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. Born November 5, 1982, Gonzalez kidnapped, raped, and murdered 18-year-old Bridget Townsend on January 15, 2001, in Bandera County. According to court records, Gonzalez forced Townsend into his truck after entering her boyfriend's home, drove her to a remote family ranch in Medina County, sexually assaulted her, and fatally shot her. Her body remained unidentified until October 2002, when Gonzalez led authorities to the site. In 2006, a jury convicted him of capital murder, sentencing him to death. His appeals cited his traumatic childhood, brain evaluation debates, and a recanted expert testimony on future dangerousness, but both state and federal courts denied relief. In his final hours, Gonzalez participated in Texas's faith-based program on death row, wrote apology letters to the Townsend family, and received spiritual counseling. For his last meal, he declined any formal request, but was served the standard prison tray. Before witnesses, he apologized directly to Bridget's relatives, saying, "To the Townsend family, I'm sorry," and added, "Warden, I'm ready." At 6:26 p.m., he received pentobarbital. At 6:50 p.m., his execution was pronounced completed, marking Texas's 8th execution of the year and drawing debates over the fairness of capital punishment. Richard Norman Rojam, Jr. On June 27, 2024, 66-year-old Richard Norman Rojam, Jr. was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. Rojam had been on death row since 1985 for the 1984 kidnapping, rape, and murder of his 7-year-old former stepdaughter, Layla Cummings, in Burns Flat, Oklahoma. In June 1985, a Custer County jury convicted him of capital murder based on evidence that he abducted Layla from her home, sexually assaulted her, and stabbed her to death. Her mutilated body was discovered in a rural field days later. Evidence included a condom wrapper and fingerprints linking Rojam to the crime. He endured 2 overturned convictions due to trial errors before a third jury resentenced him to death in 2007. In the lead-up to execution, he sought clemency, arguing DNA from Layla's fingernails did not match him, but the Pardon and Parole Board unanimously denied a reprieve. For his last meal, Rojam requested a small Little Caesars pizza with double cheese and double pepperoni, 8 salt packets, 2 vanilla ice cream cups, and a bottle of Werner's ginger ale. He declined to offer final words, stating, I've said my goodbyes." At 10:16 a.m., the 3-drug protocol was administered. Moments later, his breathing ceased, and he was declared dead, closing a 40-year chapter of legal and moral debates in Oklahoma's capital punishment history. Keith Edmund Gavin. On July 18, 2024, 64-year-old Keith Edmund Gavin was executed by lethal injection at Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama. Gavin's crime dated back to February 1977, when 17-year-old Nancy Trial walked to a local store in Mobile, Alabama. Gavin, then 20, approached her and forced her into his car at gunpoint. He drove her to a secluded area, raped her, and fatally shot her before dumping her body in a rural ditch. Investigators identified Gavin through a fingerprint match found on a stolen purse and eyewitness descriptions. At his 1978 trial, prosecutors presented ballistic evidence linking a handgun found in Gavin's home to the murder, as well as forensic testimony confirming sexual assault. The jury convicted him of capital murder, and he was sentenced to death. Over nearly 47 years on death row, Gavin filed multiple appeals, arguing improper jury instructions and ineffective counsel. All were denied by state and federal courts. In his final days, he received visits from several family members and church volunteers. His last meal was fried catfish, hush puppies, collard greens, and a slice of chocolate cake. When given the chance to speak, Gavin offered a brief apology to Nancy's family, saying, "I'm sorry for the pain I caused." At 6:01 p.m., a single dose of pentobarbital was administered. He was pronounced dead at 6:06 p.m. Arthur Lee Burton. On August 7, 2024, 54-year-old Arthur Lee Burton was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. Burton had been convicted for the March 26, 2002, robbery and murder of gas station clerk Charles Chuck Thompson in San Antonio. Surveillance footage captured Burton entering the station, pointing a revolver at Thompson and demanding cash. When Thompson attempted to use the register, Burton shot him multiple times before fleeing on foot. Investigators identified Burton through fingerprints lifted from a discarded glove and a neighbor's tip after seeing him wearing clothes matching those on the surveillance tape. At his 2003 trial, prosecutors introduced Thompson's autopsy photos, ballistics reports linking the crime gun to Burton's revolver, and eyewitness testimony placing Burton at the scene. Despite his defense claiming a coerced confession, the jury found him guilty of capital murder. Over 21 years on death row, Burton's appeals, citing mental health issues and suppressed evidence, were repeatedly rejected. In his final hours, he met with a spiritual advisor and declined to request a special last meal, instead receiving the standard prison tray of chicken fried steak, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a roll. Before the witnesses entered, Burton's last public remark was, "I accept responsibility." At 6:17 p.m., the lethal dose of pentobarbital was administered. By 6:22 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Corrections officers described his final moments as peaceful, and family members of the victim said they felt justice had been served. Tabaron-Honey. Shortly after midnight on August 8, 2024, 48-year-old Tabaron-Honey became the first person executed in Utah in 14 years. Honey had been convicted of the 1999 sexual assault and murder of 24-year-old Claudia Ben, his ex-girlfriend's mother, in Salt Lake City. On May 1, 1999, Ben's body was discovered in her apartment, showing signs of a struggle and strangulation. The investigation focused on Honey after neighbors reported hearing Ben's voice arguing with someone, later identifying Honey's distinctive voice via an audio-recorded interview. Blood spatter evidence in his car and Ben's DNA under his fingernails reinforced prosecutors' case. In his 2000 trial, the jury heard testimony about Honey's turbulent relationship with his girlfriend and Ben's protective interference. The jury found him guilty of aggravated murder and sexual assault. He was sentenced to death in 2001. On execution day, Honey requested a cheeseburger, French fries, and a chocolate milkshake as his last meal. Before witnesses, he offered a brief apology. "I'm sorry for what I've done." He declined to say more. At exactly 12:03 a.m., a single dose of pentobarbital was administered. The fourth line ran smoothly, and Honey was pronounced dead at 12:07 a.m. His execution reignited debates over lethal injection protocols, but state officials confirmed the procedure followed all legal and medical guidelines. A handful of Ben's relatives, including her granddaughter, watched quietly through the observation window. Lauren Kensley Cole. On August 29, 2024, 57-year-old Lauren Kensley Cole was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison in Starka, Florida. Cole had kidnapped 18-year-old John Edwards and his older sister Pam while they camped in the Ocala National Forest on June 9, 1994. After initially befriending them, Cole attacked the siblings, slitting John's throat, beating him to death, and then raping Pam before leaving her tied to a tree. When park rangers found Pam the next morning, she was severely traumatized and unable to identify her attacker beyond a partial name. Investigators traced footprints to Cole's campsite and found Pam's stolen jacket in his tent, alongside blood evidence and the murder weapon. At his 1995 trial, jurors heard Pam's testimony and saw forensic evidence linking Cole to the crimes. The jury convicted him of first-degree murder and sexual battery, sentencing him to death. Over 3 decades on death row, Cole's attorneys raised issues about his childhood abuse and medical issues, including Parkinson's disease, but courts denied clemency. On execution day, he shared a last meal of pizza, M&Ms, ice cream, and soda with his son and a pen pal. Offered a final statement, Cole simply responded, "No, sir." At 6 p.m., a single dose of pentobarbital was administered. He was pronounced dead at 6:15 p.m. Victims' family members, present behind the observation glass, described feeling a sense of closure as the life drained from the man who had shattered their lives. Antonio "Tony" Martinez. On September 11, 2024, 48-year-old Antonio Martinez was executed by lethal injection at San Quentin State Prison in California. Martinez had been convicted of the April 14, 2002, murder of his younger sister, 22-year-old Maria Hernandez, in Bakersfield. Investigators found Hernandez's body in her apartment, beaten and strangled. Through cell phone records and forensic evidence, Martinez's fingerprints on a broken lamp used as a weapon, police quickly identified him as the primary suspect. Neighbors reported hearing a heated argument the night of the killing. At his 2003 trial, prosecutors painted a picture of escalating sibling rivalry fueled by addiction. Martinez admitted to confrontations but denied intent to kill. The jury, however, found the evidence overwhelming and convicted him of first-degree murder. Over 21 years on death row, Martinez filed appeals claiming ineffective counsel and mental illness, but California courts denied relief. In the weeks before his execution, he met with a spiritual advisor and spent hours writing apology letters to Hernandez's family. His final meal included carne asada tacos, Mexican rice, refried beans, and churros. As he lay on the gurney, Martinez spoke only to the chaplain, whispering, "Forgive me, Maria." He declined to give a public last statement. At 6 p.m., the single-drug protocol was administered. By 6:05 p.m., he was pronounced dead. Stephen Linwood Hall. On September 25, 2024, 54-year-old Stephen Hall was executed by lethal injection at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville, Ohio. Hall had been convicted of the February 10, 2001, driving while intoxicated crash that killed his 2 best friends, 26-year-old Eric Thompson and 24-year-old Patrick Green, in Franklin County. That night, Hall, under the influence of alcohol, swerved off the road into oncoming traffic and slammed head-on into another vehicle, instantly killing Thompson and Green. Witnesses said Hall had consumed many drinks at a local bar before getting behind the wheel. Blood alcohol tests at the scene showed his level was more than 3 times the legal limit. At his 2002 trial, prosecutors argued gross negligence. Hall's conscious decision to drive drunk sealed his fate. The jury convicted him of aggravated vehicular homicide and 2 counts of manslaughter, sentencing him to death under Ohio's aggravated DWI law. Over the next 22 years, Hall's appeals contested the law's constitutionality and claimed that his remorse and sobriety programs on death row warranted leniency. State courts rejected these arguments. In his final hours, he met privately with the mothers of his victims, offering a tearful "I'm so sorry" before execution. His last meal consisted of pepperoni pizza, garlic breadsticks, chocolate pudding, and iced tea. At 6:15 p.m., the lethal dose of pentobarbital was administered, and by 6:20 p.m., Hall was pronounced dead, bringing closure to grieving families. Marcus Darnell Johnson. At 7 p.m. on October 8, 2024, 37-year-old Marcus Johnson was executed by lethal injection at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson, Georgia. Johnson had been found guilty of the August 6, 2004, abduction, rape, and murder of 15-year-old Alicia Monroe in rural Twiggs County. Late that summer night, Johnson lured Monroe into his pickup truck under the pretense of offering her a ride home. Instead, he drove her to an abandoned farmhouse where he committed the unspeakable acts. Monroe's body was discovered 2 days later by a local farmer, prompting a statewide manhunt. Investigators matched DNA evidence from the crime scene to Johnson, who had a record of prior sexual offenses. At the 2005 trial, the prosecution emphasized Monroe's diary entries recounting a friendly encounter with a stranger and presented Johnson's incriminating cell phone records. The jury returned a death sentence. Over the next 19 years, Johnson's legal team appealed on grounds of ineffective counsel and disputed DNA analysis. Every bid for clemency was rejected. In his final hours, Johnson wrote letters apologizing to Monroe's family and said, "I wish I could take it all back." His last meal was fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread, peach cobbler, and sweet tea. As the execution commenced, Johnson held his daughter's photograph close and quietly said, "Protect her, please." He declined a formal final statement. By 7:07 p.m., the pentobarbital had taken full effect, and he was declared dead. David Lee Coleman. On October 18, 2024, 45-year-old David Lee Coleman was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison in Rayford. Coleman had been convicted for the October 3, 2005, home invasion, sexual assault, and murder of 30-year-old Melissa Price in Jacksonville. Coleman, a known burglar, broke into Price's home after tracking her from a grocery store. He forced her at knife point to his van, drove her to a remote wooded area, and assaulted and strangled her. Price's body was found by hunters 2 days later. Investigators linked Coleman to the crime via shoe prints matching his trainer soles and surveillance footage capturing his license plate near the victim's neighborhood. At his 2006 trial, the prosecution called multiple forensic experts. Coleman's defense claimed mistaken identity, but the jury convicted him of first-degree murder and sexual battery. He received a death sentence. Over nearly 19 years on death row, Coleman filed appeals citing mental health issues and procedural errors, yet courts repeatedly denied relief. In his final hours, he conversed with a prison psychologist and wrote a letter expressing remorse to Price's family. His last meal was cheeseburgers, fries, vanilla ice cream, and cola. When asked for a last statement, Coleman simply said, "God forgive me." At precisely 6:02 p.m., the sedative was administered. By 6:06 p.m., he was pronounced dead, closing a chapter of sorrow for the victim's loved ones. Freddie Eugene Owens. On September 20, 2024, 46-year-old Freddie Eugene Owens breathed his last via lethal injection at Broad River Correctional Institution. Owens was convicted for the November 12, 1997, robbery and murder of 45-year-old Irene Graves, a convenience store clerk in Greenville County. That night, Graves was working alone when Owens and an accomplice entered, demanded cash, and fatally shot her when she hesitated. Witnesses described seeing Owens flee on foot. Investigators later tracked him through surveillance footage and ballistic matches. At his 1999 trial, Prosecutors presented Graves's blood-stained uniform and shell casings matching the gun found in Owens's possession. Owens insisted he had only participated in the robbery, not the shooting, but the jury convicted him of first-degree murder and robbery. Over 27 years on death row, his attorneys argued ineffective counsel and his mental health struggles, but courts denied relief. In his final hours, Owens received visits from his mother, daughter, and sister. His last meal was 2 cheeseburgers, French fries, a ribeye steak, 6 chicken wings, 2 strawberry sodas, and a slice of apple pie. When given a chance to speak publicly, he quietly said bye to his attorney. Moments later, at 6:45 p.m., a single dose of pentobarbital silenced his breathing, and he was pronounced dead at 6:55 p.m. He was greeted by a hush in the chamber as witnesses processed the first execution in South Carolina after 13 years. Travis James Mullis, at 7:01 p.m. on September 24, 2024, 38-year-old Travis James Mullis was executed by lethal injection in the Huntsville Unit, Texas, for the January 29, 2004-2008 murder of his 3-month-old son, Elijah Mullis. On that night, Mullis took his infant to the Galveston seawall alone, where, according to his own confession, he sexually assaulted and then stomped on Elijah's skull until the baby died. After driving away, Mullis fled the state, but his conscience led him to turn himself in to Philadelphia police 4 days later. In a written statement, he admitted full responsibility. At his 2011 trial, the prosecution used Mullis's videotaped confession, forensic autopsy photos, and expert testimony to show the baby's injuries were consistent with blunt force trauma. His defense highlighted his history of childhood sexual abuse, mental health issues, and remorse, but the jury found him guilty of capital murder and sentenced him to death. Mullis waived all appeals, stating his remorse and accepting the sentence. In his final hours, he met with his pastor, wrote letters of apology to his son's mother, and received a simple last meal of chicken fajitas, mashed potatoes, green beans, cornbread, and iced tea. Standing in the chamber, he looked toward the witness room and said, "I regret every decision that put me here. I'm sorry for my son's mother," then closed his eyes as pentobarbital coursed through his veins. He was declared dead at 7:01 p.m., leaving grieving family members to reflect on a tragedy born of abuse and despair. Marcellus Williams. On September 24, 2024, at 6 p.m., 54-year-old Marcellus Williams was executed by lethal injection at Eastern Reception, Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre, Missouri. Williams had been convicted in 2003 for the August 7, 1998, stabbing death of 32-year-old Felicia Leisha Gale, a former St. Louis Post-Dispatch reporter. Gale was found in her Fenton apartment with multiple stab wounds after agreeing to meet Williams, whom she knew socially. Prosecutors presented eyewitness testimony and microscopic hair evidence purportedly linking Williams to the scene, along with coded journal entries. Williams insisted he was innocent, and in 2021, new DNA testing revealed an unidentified male's profile on the murder weapon, prompting the St. Louis County prosecutor to file a motion for post-conviction relief. Newspapers and innocence advocates mounted a final clemency campaign, highlighting the lack of conclusive forensic proof and possible racial bias in his trial. Governor Parson denied clemency, and courts refused to stay the execution. In his last hours, Williams met with spiritual counselors, wrote letters apologizing to Gale's family for their loss, even though he maintained he did not commit the crime, and shook hands with fellow death row inmates. He declined a special last meal, instead receiving the standard prison tray of chicken and vegetables. Moments before the drugs were administered, he recited a brief verse from the Quran. "All praise is due to Allah in every situation," then whispered, "I forgive you, Judge," to the warden. At 6:04 p.m., pentobarbital began to flow. By 6:08 p.m., his chest rose and fell once more before growing still. His execution sparked protests from innocence advocates and renewed debate over capital punishment's fallibility. Emmanuel Antonia Littlejohn. At 10:17 a.m. on September 26, 2024, 52-year-old Emmanuel Antonia Littlejohn was executed by lethal injection at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester. Littlejohn had been condemned for the June 19, 1992, robbery and murder of 31-year-old Kenneth Mears, owner of a southeast Oklahoma City convenience store. On that night, Littlejohn and co-defendant Glenn Bethany entered Mears' store at gunpoint, demanding cash. Eyewitnesses testified Littlejohn stood beside Mears while Bethany raised the weapon and fired. Investigators recovered matching ballistics and surveillance footage placing Littlejohn inside the store. At his 1994 trial, prosecution witnesses recounted hearing the gunshot and seeing Littlejohn flee on foot. Ballistic experts matched the bullet to the pistol found in his possession. Littlejohn admitted to the robbery but claimed Bethany was the shooter, yet the jury convicted him of first-degree murder, robbery, and attempted robbery, sentencing him to death. Over the next 30 years, his lawyers argued insufficient evidence to prove he pulled the trigger, citing questionable eyewitness identifications, but courts denied relief. In his final hours, Littlejohn received visits from his mother and daughter. He told them he loved them and urged them to take care. His last meal was a meat pizza, 2 slices of cheesecake, and a Coke. As he was strapped to the gurney, he took a deep breath, held a small cross given by his spiritual advisor, and told witnesses, "Everything is going to be okay. I love you." At exactly 10:10 a.m., the lethal drugs were administered. His breathing slowed over 4 agonizing minutes. Declared dead at 10:17 a.m., his case reignited arguments over executing inmates when causation of death remains contested. Alan Eugene Miller. On September 26, 2024, 59-year-old Alan Eugene Miller was put to death by nitrogen hypoxia at William C. Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama, becoming the second inmate in U.S. history executed by this method. Miller had been convicted for the August 5, 1999, triple homicide of co-workers Lee Michael Holdbrooks, Christopher Scott Yancey, and former supervisor Terry Lee Jarvis at a heating and air conditioning distributor and a separate business in Pelham. According to trial testimony, Miller armed himself with a Glock and sequentially shot each victim. Forensic evidence and eyewitnesses traced shell casings and ballistic matches to his weapon. He initially fled but was captured later that night after police spotted his car and matched his fingerprints at the scene. At his 2000 trial, prosecutors introduced gruesome autopsy photos and witness statements detailing Miller's motive, alleged rumors about his sexuality, while the defense cited severe mental illness. The jury convicted him of capital murder and imposed a death sentence. After a failed lethal injection attempt in 2022 due to difficulty establishing intravenous access, Alabama switched to nitrogen hypoxia. In his last hours, Miller met with a priest, appeared calm, and declined special appeals. His final meal was a hamburger steak with a baked potato and French fries. When offered a last statement, he whispered, "I didn't do anything to be in here," then closed his eyes as nitrogen replaced ambient air. For 2 minutes, his body trembled and gasped in convulsions before finally going still. At 6:38 p.m., a prison doctor pronounced him dead, marking the final execution in a week that saw 5 men die across 5 states.